Hi all, DT Neil coming at you on this windy day in Chicago about storytelling, ideas, creating, and the like. I wanted to revisit something that I did the other day about the collapse of the entertainment industry, or what I perceive as the collapse. Maybe it's not collapsing, but it doesn't feel as vibrant as it once did. That's my own take. Being a Gen Xer, I'm deeply immersed in the pop culture, and I always think about it. One thing that is, I think, impossible not to see is the number of Nepo babies sprinkling themselves like dandelion seeds throughout the entertainment world, the art world, the music world, all that. And what we're seeing, I think, that's a side effect of the rampant income inequality that we've endured for the last 40 years or more. Widening, you've got these next generation people who are already on third base, and they're like, you know what, I want to be a novelist, or I've got my uncle owns this, and I think I'd be a really good director or actor, even that kind of thing. And in decades past, when it wasn't as prominent, there were still Nepo babies in decades past, but there weren't as many of them. And now there are a lot of them, which still means it's a lot of the 1%, right? Or a lot of the 0.1%. So it's still a tiny fraction of people. And again, by and large, within the entertainment industry, it's always a minority of people who are participating in it. But those folks who are Nepo babies are extremely well equipped to get seen, to get noticed, to get accepted, and to have whatever they're creating come out into the world. And the rest of us are just completely out in the weeds. Those old mythologies, those fictions of so-and-so went to a coffee shop and just happened to run into Martin Scorsese and then became a superstar. Sure. Those are fairy tales that we get to hear a lot. But for those folks who are Nepo babies, and again, there are ridiculous people who are nowhere close to any of that, who are like boosters of Nepo. Oh, no, Nepo babies are people too. Sure, okay. But from a perspective of somebody who grew up in a middle class, working class family who has no connections whatsoever, grew up in the Rust Belt, completely out of the cyclone of networking favoritism and connections and privilege and all that. I don't have any of that. So, people would say, yeah, you're a white man, so you're inherently privileged. Yeah, on some levels, but in terms of getting my work seen and accepted anywhere, nah. There's a world of difference between an unconnected person and a connected person. If you're connected, it's so much easier. The doors will open for you. The doors will be opened for you. And more importantly, you will know what doors to knock on, if you even have to knock. If you're not the niece or nephew of some big star-making person who can suddenly say, "Oh yeah, come in. I knew you since you were a little kid. Yeah, absolutely, love your work, great work." So out in the cold, and it's kind of appropriate. I can hear the wind howling right now. It's very perfect, and I don't know if you can hear it on this microphone, but it really feels that way. Like out in the weeds, disregarded, unappreciated. All I have is the quality of my work, which I've devoted so much time to. And I would honestly think that in my 20s, which, not to date myself too profoundly, but that was in the 90s, I remember, because I first sent stories out when I was 19 and 18 or 19, and of course got rejections. Of course, that's to be expected. But I remember thinking, well, why am I doing this anyway? I'm just a 20-something. I need to learn my craft. I need to develop my skill and do that. And so instead of just going, yeah, I'm all that, I'm going to go out there and conquer the world. I never did that. I was like, I have to earn my bones. I got to learn my profession, my trade. I got to do that. And I spent that decade just working, reading, working, journaling, so much stuff. And for people who are Nepo babies, they don't have to do that. They actually don't have to do that. They might do it because it's fun. Maybe they were in the south of France, on a family vacation, and they just picked up a notebook somewhere, and they were just like, yeah, I'm just going to jot some things down, maybe on the flight home, I'll just, some inspirational hit me, and then they have it, and then they just reach over the aisle to their uncle, and the uncle's like, yeah, this is great. Let's do this. Let's produce this. Anyway, the prevalence of the Nepos, and one could say, oh, it's just envy. Yeah, okay, maybe, but it's also like, let's call it what it is. And the preponderance of Nepo babies in the entertainment world, I think, is not a good sign. And I will say why. I think because they represent a very specific view of the world. And people who are outside of that bubble are excluded. And so people look at the stuff and go, this story is like the same as everything else. This is the same as this. Oh, this is boring. This is just... People react to that, I think, because they can perceive a certain narrowness of topic. I feel that. Like, you can kind of spot people who are privileged people versus people who aren't, because the idea of them not getting what they want is like, it's like antithetical to them. Like, they just like, what? Don't you know who I am? And from a middle class, and again, like I said, from a middle class perspective, it's kind of like, you're used to getting rejected. You're used to the no. It's still painful, but you don't go into it just thinking because your aunt or uncle owns some huge thing that you're able to get considered when people who don't have that benefit aren't. And people who are in that bubble, they kind of, some of them, there's two different approaches. Like, there's ones who kind of try to camouflage it and say, well, I lived in a one bedroom, a studio apartment for like a summer, and it was really hard, or I shopped at a coffee shop. I worked at a coffee shop, and I shopped, down across the street, and it was really hard. I suffered. And it's like, yeah, of course you did. Of course you did. Trust fund sufferers. Anyway, I think one of the benefits of, and the thing is the industry won't attend to this because they want that sure thing. But there is a benefit of bringing other voices to the table and other people who are outside that bubble of privilege. And again, part of my thing, and I think I mentioned this on an earlier post, is, you'd see somebody tell some story about their backpacking across South America, right? Or going on a sailboat, on a catamaran around the world, and they can write their story about that and the things that they learned on that journey. And I look at that and say, yeah, I was working at a department store. I was working at a pizza place. I was, this is my life experience. I was doing I was working in fast food. I was doing these kind of things, and sure, one could pull relevant experiences from that, but it's not like, oh, I catamaraned and I wrote poems while I was catamaranning around the Mediterranean. And it's like, everyone's like, ooh, that's really interesting. What did you do? Oh, I worked at a pizzeria. Yeah, and everyone's like, huh. So that's what I mean about that sort of burden, the burden of being outside the bubble, non-bubble people. And I'm one of them. So I persist in terms of the writing that I do. It's a bit of an act of defiance, because I think I'm one of those people, having grown up in the Rust Belt. I'm supposed to not say anything. I'm supposed to just be silent and just consume mindlessly and not ever contribute to the culture. I'm not supposed to do that. That's not that path that's approved for me. But I still continue to do it out of an act of creative and spiritual defiance. I still do it. So, Nepo babies are fortunate. Things went their way, and they continue to go their way, and that's how they get seen. That's how they get on, like, the Today Show or something like that. They get media exposure because they are somebody in the cruel calculus of capitalism. But I guess for me, all of us who are nobodies, we owe it to ourselves, A, not to think of ourselves that way, and B, to continue to try to create and exist and be like, I'm here, I am out there. And I encourage everybody to do that. it's just necessary. The culture can benefit from more voices, more ideas, more people like that. And I know some people would say, well, you're a white middle-aged guy. You're practically wearing a crown. And I'm like, not actually the case. Not actually the case. And that's how it is. So take that for what it's worth.